guys, ready for a new chapter? Our last chapter was kind of crazy. If you remember, we read Stuck, where Dana's face got stuck in her doofus face, and then the principal kind of tapped her on the head, and at the end we found out that the principal's face got stuck like that instead. So I wonder what's happening. Seems to all be because of this cloud of doom. So today's chapter is called What's the Point? In some classrooms, teachers choose the weekly spelling words. Not so in Mrs. Jules's class. She lets her students pick. Nearly everyone had a hand raised. Mrs. Jules called on Rondi. Pistachios, said Rondi. This is why other teachers don't let their students choose the words. Mrs. Jules couldn't spell pistachios, so she did what every teacher everywhere does in such a situation. That's an excellent word, Rondi, she said. Would you like to come to the board and write it? So Rondi came to the front of the room. Mrs. Jules Blake paid close attention as Rondi wrote pistachios on the board. I love pistachios, said Kathy when Rondi returned to her seat. Remember, Kathy is kind of weird right now. She's in the opposite world. Me too, said Allison. They're my third favorite nut. Mrs. Jules caught on DJ. Grumple, she said. I don't think grumple is a word, Mrs. Jules pointed out. So, asked DJ, we should still know how to spell it. It might become a word someday, Kathy agreed. Mrs. Jules wrote grumple under pistachios. Joy raised her hand. A, she suggested. A what? Asked Mrs. Jules. Just A, said Joy. Don't you think that's a little too easy? Said Mrs. Jules. It's a very common word, said Kathy. It's important that we all know how to spell it. Mrs. Jules couldn't argue with that, so she added A to the list. Myron raised his hand. Yes, Myron, asked Mrs. Jules. What's a point? Myron asked. Well, that's 3 words, said Mrs. Jules. And all good ones, chirped Kathy. The cloud of doom is getting bigger every day, Myron exclaimed. Why does it matter that we can spell? So we can read and write, Mrs. Jules replied. Well, what's the point of reading? Asked Leslie. And what's the point of writing? Asked Jason. And what's the point of math? Asked Benjamin. There is no point, Myron grumbled. He slammed his pencil down hard on his desk. The point broke off of it. I understand you're scared and upset, said Mrs. Jules. But what's the point of quitting? We can all just sit around and grumble, or we can try our best, cloud or no cloud. And it hasn't been all bad, Mrs. Jules continued. We've been getting a lot more nail clippings. Well, that was true. Ever since the cloud of doom appeared, everyone's fingernails and toenails have been growing a lot faster lately. They had to be clipped 3 or 4 times a week. The number on the board now was 19,457. Someday the cloud of doom will be gone, said Mrs. Jules, and the world will be a much better place, even better than before the cloud. Colors will be more colorful. Music will be more musical. Even Mrs. Bush's food will taste good. The bigger the storm, the brighter the rainbow. And at that moment, a crack of thunder shook the classroom, and the lights went out. The children screamed, ah! They weren't scared. They just liked screaming in the dark. Mrs. Jules lit a candle, and everyone settled down. Now, shall we continue with our spelling? Jenny raised her hand and suggested, hope? Excellent word, said Mrs. Jules. She held her candle in one hand and the chalk in the other. She said the letters out loud as she wrote them on the blackboard. H-O-P-E. Sounds like a clue, maybe. There's a little hope there. I don't know what this next chapter is about, but it's called Mrs. Surlaw, and it appears that there is a walrus for some reason in the school. So join me next time for our next chapter. Bye, guys.